Good evening, y'all. Music's kind of loud. Haven't done a live in forever. Certainly not without announcing one. Been off of Discord for quite a while. Back on Twitter, though. School year is ending. And today I'm kind of on the recovery from an illness. Had a terrible day yesterday. And man, I just felt like reaching out and talking to somebody. So that's you guys. Hello all. Thanks for being here. So I've got a couple of things I just wanted to look at and talk about, comment on online, and just sort of take the stream from there. That's really the whole deal. Love to hear how you guys are doing. Feel free to drop into the comments. I'm not using any fancy OBSs today, just using a StreamYard. It's pretty straightforward back and forth as far as that goes. And that's the deal. So I want to start with actually reacting to an article that I haven't read yet. It's a straight up, clean, just reaction. Read along, I suppose we might call it. From City Journal. So let me get this up and start working through it here. White progressives. Oh boy. White progressives. Diversity for thee, but not for me. So that's the deal. Actually, let's go ahead and go to this view. Here we go. That's better. Diversity for thee, but not for me. It reminds me of that Quaker quote, often cited. How does it go? All the world's mad, save for me and thee, and I'm not so sure about thee. Something like that. Anyway, diversity for thee, but not for me. So, as I said, I haven't read this story yet. Well, the basic idea here is that white progressives vote one way with their ballots, another way with their feet, when it comes to diversity. In particular, when it comes to living in quote-unquote diverse places. And I absolutely love that the photograph says white glove moving and storage. So absolutely perfect. I know I'm going to enjoy the heck out of this article because this is the sort of thing that really gets my blood boiling, gets me up. And this is because, how's my audio, by the way? I mean, StreamYard is pretty straightforward. Yeah, audio should be good. There was a New York Times story done a couple years ago that was about how white California Democrats are all for activism and what's up, us, Carl? Taco to you too, dude. Taco Mondays. Gonna talk about it. They will go ahead and go after people who are mean to illegal immigrants, to the undesirables of their world. But every time they can vote to keep such undesirables out of their neighborhoods, they do. And they find, of course, Byzantine ways of justifying it. So I know I'm going to enjoy reading this article. All right, let's go ahead and zoom in a little here. So you guys can read along with me and enjoy. Así no más. What's up, Israel? How are you, man? Good to see you. How are you and your family doing? All right. White progressives in America, as in Britain. By the way, please forgive my voice. As I mentioned, I have been ill. And I will mute through any coughing fits. Garcia's, glad to hear you well. Izzy, glad to hear you are. I mean, I assume you're lumped in with that group of Garcias who's doing well. Goodness. See, already my voice is being put to the proof. Uh-oh. This might end up being a bad idea. All right, white progressives in America, as in Britain, avoid diverse neighborhoods and are more likely to leave diverse places than white conservatives. By the way, I hate, and this is what the stream's going to be, by the way, me like stopping every half sentence and commenting. So gird your loins for that. I hate this use of the term diverse. I don't blame the author, one Eric Kaufman, for using it this way, because it is the quickest way to communicate his ideas. Regardless, I hate it. It means nothing, right? Anyway. So white progressives in America, as in Britain, avoid diverse neighborhoods and are more likely to leave diverse places than white conservatives. Gasp! In effect, they don't practice what they preach. These are the findings. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. These are the findings from large-scale quantitative research in the United States and Britain, recently published in my academic article, White Flight from Immigration, Attitudes to Diversity and White Residential Choice. Diversity is a core value for white progressives in America and other Western countries. Man. So true that it be a truism. What a bizarre core value to have, and yet it is. I think that fruitfulness, plentifulness, variety. See, I'm all about variety rather than diversity. But let's accept diversity as meaning variety. I'm all about that. As a fruit, as a blessing. Not as a core value. But this is not wrong. That is indeed a core value of white progressives. Over 60% of them support increasing immigration. I don't even know what that means, increasing immigration. I suppose that makes more sense in a British context, which I think this is like a half British, half American thing. Because they don't have the same illegal immigration issues that we have, right? So we can't speak feasibly of increasing or decreasing immigration the way Canadians or Brits can. As the Manhattan Institute's Zach Goldberg shows, they are the only major part of the population to feel warmer toward other racial groups than toward their own. How about that? Okay, so I don't know if the only major part of the population refers to whites or progressive whites. Probably progressive whites. So you ask anyone else, they feel most warmly toward their own people group. But white progressives feel warmer toward other racial groups than toward their own. And listen carefully to that. That is not the same thing as saying that you love everybody. That's saying that you despise yourself. Right? You can be the most kind-hearted, open-hearted, charitable person and love your own family best of all. And if you despise your family, you are in an enormous identity crisis. And that's what's being described here. So white progressives rate whites as more lazy and violent and less intelligent than blacks. Among white progressives, 87% say that having an increasing number of people of many different races, ethnic groups, and nationalities makes the U.S. a better place to live, while virtually none says that it makes the country worse. That's interesting. I actually agree with that. I do think that having an increasing number of people of many different races, ethnic groups, and nationalities makes the U.S. better. Far more fun. Far more interesting. All under Christ. We need to get those Latin Americans up from under the sway of socialism so they can vote the right way in Texas. All right. You would think, I have to take frequent sips. You would think that aversion to one's racial group would, yeah, that's a good word. Isn't that ridiculous that you would have an aversion toward your own people? I mean, you guys know my own history with the word race. We have to communicate. But you would think that one's aversion, that an aversion to one's own people, right? That is what's being described. These people hate themselves. And that's going to connect to the other thing I wanted to look at today. I have two things on the docket today. This, and a thing about euthanasia and Canadian attitudes toward euthanasia. That also has to do with self-hate. A quarter of Canadians think that killing yourself to get out of poverty is a good thing, having that option. That poverty is a good reason to justify suicide and euthanasia. The only way to think that when you're not poor yourself is to hate your own life. Because then you imagine, man, I hate my own life now. How much more would I hate it if I were poor? And the misery is apparently unbearable to even consider. They hate themselves, they hate their own lives. They have an aversion to their own people. You would think that aversion to one's racial group would prompt white progressives to flee disproportionately white areas for more diverse ones. Surveys do show that white progressives are more likely than white conservatives to indicate that they want to live in diverse places. Indicate. Virtue signaling. Studies that present Americans with show cards of stylized houses as a proxy for race. Some colored white, some black, with a proportion of the latter varied. This is pretty weird. Find that those with progressive racial attitudes say they prefer more diverse places than conservatives. These findings have been replicated in Britain and the Netherlands. Okay, so what are they saying here? That they show pictures with different colored houses and people who like more colors. That's a diverse place. So people with progressive, quote-unquote, racial attitudes choose the more colorful pictures. I guess that's what they're saying. There's probably something, some commentary about suburbia baked into that. We need to up our aesthetic game as a culture. Little houses on the hillside. No, wait, it's not little houses, little boxes. Little boxes on the hillside. Little boxes made of ticky-tacky. But when the rubber hits the road, white liberal attitudes don't translate into behavior. I mean, that's it, right? I mean, that's it. So many stories about this. And now, apparently, according to City Journal, a scholarly effort to prove that. Getting a handle on actual migration is tricky. It requires a large survey because most people don't move during a given year. Ideally, we need to track people over time, which demands repeated surveys of the same individuals. Finally, we must track both demographic factors, such as ethnicity and income, and political ones, such as voting or attitudes to immigration and diversity. Longitudinal surveys of this kind exist in Britain, but not in America. My strategy was therefore first to test my arguments with British data, and then turn, for the U.S. study, to geotagged Twitter data. Wow. I wonder if he asked Elon Musk for this for this content. That's very funny. Yo, Elon. Geotagged Twitter data from pro and anti-Donald Trump individuals, as well as surveys that asked people for their past and present zip codes. Interesting. Results from Britain's census confirm what we already know. Minority people move toward areas of greater diversity than whites. My study is based on a massive representative census sample of 123,000 intercensal movers, and it controls for a wide range of material factors, including education, income, age, marital status, distance of move, and living in a mixed ethnicity household. Now, any demographic study, any survey study worth its salt is going to have controls. but one always has to ask exactly what those controls are and how they're implemented, right? It's not, it doesn't tell us a lot to say they control for education, control for incomes. Like how well, what are the actual numbers that you used to do that? It also accounts for the affluence and population density of origin and destination neighborhoods. For data security reasons, I had to divide wards, averaging about 6,000 people, into 5 groups, each containing a fifth of the country's minority population. Ooh, okay, we have a graph. Figure 1 here, and we'll come back and we'll look at it carefully. Figure 1, based on a 1% linked sample of the census of England and Wales, shows that among people moving from the most diverse quintile of wards, averaging 66% minority, both whites and minorities moved away from diversity by necessity because their only choice is similar or lower levels of diversity. However, the average white British person moves to an area fully 3 quintiles less diverse, averaging 13% minorities, while the typical minority moves to a neighborhood 1 to 2 quintiles less diverse, averaging between 27% and 43% minority. So if I understand that correctly, what it's saying, what that last little sentence said is that minorities, especially from these wards that are lower down the economic scale, they by necessity have to move to places that are less diverse because they live in the most diverse places. And they still, even though by necessity they have to move somewhere less diverse, they still do better, as it were, than whites. So here, let me see if I can say that right. The typical minority moves to a neighborhood 1 to 2 quintiles less diverse, and the white British person moves to an area fully 3 quintiles less diverse. So like these, so they're saying that the average white British person works extra hard to get into whiter areas. This ethnic difference holds regardless of where people start from. Thus, in the most homogeneous wards, averaging 2% minorities, everyone moves to more diverse places, but minorities move to more diverse areas than white Britons. That wouldn't say much. That wouldn't mean much, except that like enjoys like. There's a morally neutral way of talking about that. Except that certainly for all white progressives, this is a moral issue. And they should in fact be seeking out diversity and trying to create a diverse culture. So they are definitely talking out of both sides of their mouths when it comes to that. Okay. So the white British movers predicted change in minority quintile, and then this is the percentage, minority share in quintile of residents prior to move, right? So they divided the British population into fifths, into these, they divided the wards, right, Britain itself into fifths, from least diverse to most diverse. Am I reading that correctly? I think I am. Tell me if I'm not. The ethnic differences in figure 1, or maybe let's just explain the graphic, could simply reflect minority preferences rather than white ones. Because one thing that certainly makes sense is that if you are from a minority living in an area that is not diverse, where you're one of 2%, and you need to move to a new town, you're not going to be, you could move into an all-white neighborhood, be fine with that, or you could move into, a half South Asian neighborhood and be fine with that. Kind of like whatever. Whereas whites are going to be more trepidatious about that for a variety of reasons. And again, the hypocrisy. 2 pieces of evidence suggest that white preferences really matter. First, Shokart studies consistently find that whites prefer their neighborhoods to have a higher share of their own group than Black, Hispanic, or Asian respondents do. Yeah, that's interesting because they're asking blacks, Hispanics, and Asians, do you prefer your neighborhood to have a higher share of your own group? And they're using visual things to do the survey. I don't know what those visuals were, but according to those tests, those studies, um, Hispanics may very well, and it hasn't specified yet, but Hispanics, for example, may very well prefer a neighborhood that is more Hispanic and even majority Hispanic. But whites consistently prefer to have a higher share than other groups. So they're less comfortable with lower, not just their own, having a higher share, like as in a dominant majority, should we say, but even if that's too small. That's really interesting. Second, whiter neighborhoods, cities, and states tend to see absolute white population growth, or at least less decline compared with more diverse places. White neighborhoods, cities, and states tend to see absolute white population growth, or at least less decline compared with more diverse places. Okay. While the white percentage in a place is affected by minority trends, the absolute numbers of whites should be relatively independent. A metro area like Nashville, for instance, might experience falling white population share due to large-scale Hispanic and Asian growth, even as its white population increases in absolute terms. However, many diverse metros resemble Los Angeles or Houston, with white populations declining in both percentage terms due to minority growth and in absolute terms. The latter is an important indicator of white mobility, independent of minority patterns. This study wasn't conducted over a long enough term to take birth rates into account. But I mean, even anecdotally, like we know that whites are leaving cities. With this in mind, Figure 2 shows that in the 2000s, metro areas in whiter states such as Idaho or Utah, think Boise or Salt Lake City, experienced white population growth, while those in the most diverse states such as California and Texas, for example, Los Angeles or Houston, saw significant white population decline. Okay, we know this. Again, it's the motive that is interesting, and it's the motive that will be interesting to study in this, right? Can he connect that to progressivism? It's easier to imagine in Britain, Californians making all the noise about open borders and huzzah for immigration. Are those people making all that noise leaving? Or is it just my friends, right? Is it just the people who have been going on for 20 years about how terrible California is? While one relatively diverse state, New Mexico, and I don't even know what diverse means. New Mexico isn't diverse. I mean, he's using the word the way it's acceptable, but New Mexico has, it's like something like 40% white, 30% indigenous, 30% Hispanic non-white. Okay. And however so whatever, like that's 3 blocks. To me, 3 blocks doesn't say diverse. I mean, diversity is we're supposed to be talking about a variety here. And there are 3 ancient populations, the least ancient of which, of course, are the Anglos. But 3 populations that have been there for a long, long, long time. And there's actually very little change in those ratios, in those proportions. But whatever. It's diverse because it's not very white. It's just a stupid way of talking about it. All right. Yeah, New Mexico is not diverse at all. Yeah. Take it from a man who knows. All right. So, one relatively diverse state, by that he means non-white, retained metropolitan white population. The general, and then other moderately diverse ones, such as Nevada and South Carolina, retained metropolitan white population. The general pattern has been for more rapid absolute white population decline in metro areas in diverse states. The same holds at the local level in both Britain and the US, apart from a small number of gentrifying neighborhoods in high-income cities such as London or New York. Okay, I mean, I think all of this so far is pretty much common knowledge for anyone who reads a newspaper. Well, that was quite a boomer thing to say. But anyone who stays informed. So we'll see when the connection to voting patterns and to geolocations for Twitter accounts. I love that. That's what I want to see come out. All right, Metro US white population growth by state. Okay, so the white share of state metro population 2000 on the bottom. White change 2010, white population. Okay. So the axis across the bottom is showing the share of the metro population between like 40% and all of it, right? So in Pierre, North Dakota, I assume is like 97% white. Okay. And then up over here is the percentage, 0 being here in the middle where my cursor is. So like Idaho had a 10% growth in white population over the first 10 years of the 21st century. Is that right? Wow. Yeah, it looks that way. It doesn't say percentage point, so I believe that's 10%. Okay. So we can see the whitest states all the way on the right, and the states with the most white growth in the upper half. Right, so Tennessee, Alaska, New Mexico, slight shrinkage of the white. South Carolina, Utah, Idaho, growth. Then places like Maryland and California. Look at California all the way at the bottom and all the way to the left. Pretty fascinating stuff. I'll go ahead and put the link to this in chat as a comment for you guys to look at yourselves later if you want. So I've established that whites move to whiter places than minorities do. Right, that's all he's done so far. We kind of know that. There are a lot of complicating issues potentially between all this, right? Economy is going to pot in California. Whites are more likely to have the resources to move out, more likely to have the culture to move out, to move away. And, you know, with the general human tendency, like move where people are kind of like you. I think a lot of minority families in California would be a lot less likely to move to cowboy country in Nevada or Wyoming, right? All right, I've established that whites move to whiter places than minorities do. Fine. But do white conservatives and liberals differ in the racial composition of their migration destinations? That's the question. That's the fun question. The English census asks a question about whether someone identifies as English or British. Interesting. Among ethnic majority white Britons in England, other studies show that English identifiers tend to have a more ethnic sense of national identity and are more likely to support Brexit and want less immigration. I mean, that just makes sense. Yet the census data from Figure 1, which shows a major ethnic difference in where people move, finds no significant difference between white English and British identifiers across more than 120,000 people who moved between 2001 and 2011. So what they've done there, so if you say you're British, you're more likely to have well, let's call it a cosmopolitan attitude. More likely to be for the European Union. You think of yourself, you think of the United Kingdom and Great Britain as more of a thing than England, right? Because the United Kingdom is England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. But like your Englishness is very important for you, and his Welshness is really important to your neighbor. You say, I am English. Well, those people have certain typical political patterns. People who identify as more like, they'll reject the English label and say that they're British, are going to have these more progressive, by and large, attitudes. The Brexit question is a purer measure of opposition to diversity than English versus British identity, since opposition to immigration was by far the most important predictor of whether a person voted to leave the European Union. Pardon me. Figure 3 makes use of the 40,000 strong Understanding Society survey, which tracks the same individuals each year. It again controls for standard drivers of neighborhood choice, such as wealth, education, age, and marital status, as well as the population density and deprivation level of origin and destination wards. Notice how the red and blue lines overlap, whereas they are widely spaced in Figure 1. We're going to notice this soon. I haven't looked at it yet. This shows that ethnicity matters, but ideology doesn't. Oh, yeah, the nut. Whether we look at Brexit support, as shown in Figure 3, left versus right voting, or support for the populist UK Independence Party or British National Party, white liberals and conservatives choose similarly diverse areas to move to. Okay, so the bottom shows the share of minorities in ward prior to move, and the side shows predicted change in ward minority share. Okay. So they are moving. Okay, they remain and they leave for blue and red. Change in minority share by EU. Oh, right. So to remain and to leave doesn't refer to moving. Remain and leave refers to the EU referendum on Brexit. And they're virtually identical. Man, look at that. The U.S. is somewhat trickier to study, I imagine so, because it lacks longitudinal large-scale survey data with the right questions. I therefore collected a sample. By the way, it is sort of funny, like when you... The United States still have a few embedded protections and cultural reactions against data collection that a long time ago other people signed over or thought was fine. It's remarkable that we don't have a national ID yet, and of course they have all of our information. And of course there have been efforts underway to get everyone to voluntarily do those things. I am avoiding as long as possible getting those driver's licenses that are federally integrated. Boo to that. All right. The U.S. somewhat trickier. Great. I therefore collected a sample of 142 million Trump-related tweets. Oh, just that thought is so funny. I collected a sample. Okay, so the sample is 142 million Trump-related tweets between March and November 2016. Only a 1% subset had geotagging turned on. And of these, only a small proportion moved during this period. Residence is determined by matching morning and evening location. Sentiment analysis helped me identify strong pro and anti-Trump accounts, which resulted in a sample of just over 6,000, which is actually decent. These were then hand-coded to assign approximate age, gender, and race. Okay, there's all sorts of unreliability with this, but I kind of like it. It's saucy. It feels real, even though I'm sure that there would be statistics professors watching this getting all itchy with. I mean, I assume they're looking at profile pics to this guy looks about 35. This guy looks white. As in Britain. As in Britain, I found that whites tended to move to whiter neighborhoods than minorities. But did white Trump and anti-Trump Americans behave like British Brexit and Remain voters? Yes. The results of this analysis appear in Figure 4 and reinforce the British findings. Namely, whites who strongly opposed Trump moved to places that were just as white as whites who strongly supported him. While the downward sloping line shows that whites moving from diverse places chose less diverse destinations, as we would expect, given that those in diverse areas can only move to less diverse ones, there is no significant difference between the colored lines representing degrees of pro and anti-Trump sentiment. Is that true? those in the most diverse areas can only move to less diverse ones. That is absolutely true. But say you're in a middlingly diverse one, there's the assumption of less diverse neighborhoods being more prosperous and that you yourself are becoming more prosperous. What if you have to move back to your parents' old neighborhood, say? I don't think that's true. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something. Change in white share and zip code, white movers only. Okay. So we're talking about differences of, 3, 4, 5 percentage points. A skeptic might say that people voted for Trump for many reasons besides their view of diversity, though the data are clear that views on immigration diversity vary enormously between Republicans and Democrats. So I ran a survey of about 600 individuals. The same individuals from Twitter? I guess not. Asking them for their current and previous zip codes to assess moving. The survey also asked about immigration attitudes, as well as 2016 vote and warmth toward Trump on a 0 to 100 degree thermometer. The results are identical to the American Twitter and British longitudinal survey analyses. White Republicans and Democrats, or pro and anti-Trump supporters, don't differ when it comes to the racial composition of their destination. Okay. What is M-Turk? I skipped a few lines and now I have a question. All right, figure 5 shows that whites who want immigration reduced a lot move to places that are just as diverse. Okay, whites who want immigration reduced a lot move to places that are just as diverse as those who want it increased. Increased diversity equals decreased middle class. Maybe. I think it depends on what you mean by middle class and who's filling it. Maybe. I think first, like immediately, of say in California, the Indian and Korean populations, but maybe. Certainly, I suppose it depends on how causal you're making that statement. While the smaller sample size, especially the small number of whites from highly diverse areas, is less reliable, the pattern remains the same. The tightness of the lines reinforces the finding that whites who support a national politics of diversity move away from diversity at the same rate as conservative whites who oppose national diversification through immigration. Okay, so I'll come back to this part, but just so everyone knows what we're doing here. We are enjoying a news story from City Journal talking about how white progressives make all this noise about diversity, but when it comes down to where they themselves live, they think the whiter the better. But they're going to get up in your face if it's your life. Love it. So, thus far, the evidence shows that white liberals and conservatives have the same domestic migration patterns when controlling for education, age, income, marital status, urbanity, and other factors. Yet I've only been comparing movers, assessing white avoidance rather than white flight. That is, looking only at whether new white residents avoid diverse areas rather than considering all people, comparing movers with stayers to assess if certain kinds of whites are more likely to leave diverse places than others. One could plausibly make the claim that when you bring flight into the picture, white liberals are more likely to leave diversity than white conservatives. The Understanding Society data in Britain shows that white British voters who want to stay in the European Union are a few points less likely than their British counterparts to say that they want to move. But as Figure 6 shows, white Remain voters are more likely actually to leave diverse places than white Brexit voters, after controlling for numerous factors. Why? And this is what I'm talking about with controls. It's good that they're controlling. But we don't know really what those controls are. Because as I was reading that paragraph, one of the thoughts I had was, well, among white populations in Britain and the United States, there actually is a connection between, if you make really good money, you are actually more likely to be progressive, and you have the ability to move, right? A lot of blue collar or rural whites have fewer options to move anyway. So even if they wanted to, right? So they say they're controlling for that, but in what manner? And that's obviously not the place for. There's not room for that in a City Journal article, but that would be interesting. A clue lies in the generally lower rate of white Brexit out-migration across all types of neighborhoods. All types of neighborhood. Wow, you don't see that often. Little grammar geek moment. Okay. Types. We're talking about types in the plural, but types of one thing. Like a platonic type. Types of neighborhood. Wow, and I just straight up Americanly said types of neighborhoods. How about that? In effect, movers are more liberal than stayers. Yeah, see, and this is the thing. I'm not sure that how well you can control for that. Diverse urban neighborhoods tend to have higher turnover. Since white conservatives are more constant in their attachment. See, that's an interesting note, too. Right, white conservatives are more constant in their attachments than white liberals. Right, they are perhaps a touch more connected to their soil, to their family. Their propensity to leave differs from white liberals in diverse transient places. The net result, amazingly, is that white liberals are more like amazingly. I mean, it's such blatant hypocrisy. I think I'm past the point of amazement. The net result, amazingly, is that white liberals are more likely to flee diverse places than white conservatives. A Swedish study likewise found that in diverse neighborhoods, whites who stayed expressed more negative attitudes toward immigrants than whites who left. Again, like how many of these had the option of leaving or not? And how many of them, even having the option, were doing a Clint Eastwood and Gran Torino sort of move. All right, so this graphic. Probability of moving, white British by EU referendum preference, predicted probability of moving, and then share of minorities in ward of origin prior to move. Okay. So those who voted to remain, by far, I mean, double in a lot of this. Wow. Moved whiter. Interesting. This is so consistent with the thing that rules progressive thought in all areas, which really is that for thee but not for me attitude, right? I mean, they really think that the people are the hoi polloi. They can't rule themselves. They have no self-control. They are dumb. They need to be ruled. We need to tell them what to do. I, however, can be trusted to make good decisions for my own life. Goodness gracious. The bottom line, white liberals may vote for diversity with their ballots, but their feet tell a different story. Eric Kaufman, Manhattan Institute, professor of politics at the University of London. The Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. Huh. Interesting. All right, well, there you go, guys. I was honestly not... It either needed to be a lot shallower or a lot deeper. That just kind of left me wanting more for dunking purposes, But I guess I already knew this was the case in the United States in places like California, and I'm aware of actual electoral and civic hypocrisy that actually happens. The stories being done about that. I mean, it's interesting to see that it goes on in Britain as well. This actually connects to something I have been thinking about recently in regards to socialism and socialism in Europe is I'm not going to get into this particular rabbit hole, but this is one of the reasons I've been thinking about this. The recent Texas shooter, Mauricio Garcia, was that his name? Or is that on my mind because Israel's been in chat? Mauricio de something. Seems to have been part of a far-right neo-Nazi movement. And there were people out there on social media just kind of laughing out loud at the idea that he would be a part of such a movement, which to me just showed a lot of historical ignorance, and a lot of ignorance about the fight between the extreme left and the extreme right, which even using the terms extreme left and extreme right buy into Enlightenment and French revolutionary ideas. I reject the whole thing. I use those terms the way the recent article writer used the term diverse. I mean, you have to use these terms to communicate. But anyway, it's been on my mind a little bit. And then in my Spanish literature course that I've been teaching, we've been studying some of the generation of '98 poets who were integrally involved in a lot of educational movements to strengthen Spanish identity at the turn of the last century. Really fascinating stuff. Really, just these are poets and playwrights, but they're classical educators and great stuff. And the Spanish Civil War comes along. And it's a war between socialists and ended up becoming fascists. And I don't have to endorse Franco to tell you which side I would have fought on. I would have fought on the side that was not dragging priests out in the street to be shot dead. Communists are terrible. Now, as it happened, it ended up being a war between two evils, and some of this generation of '98 ended up being exiled or getting into conflict with the generals and with Franco, but they were overwhelmingly anti-communist, which was really interesting. And I was thinking about socialist thinking and communistic thinking in the West, because both in Russia, in the Soviet Union, and in China, you had a long, long history of oppression, voicelessness, and absolute poverty. We think about poverty, and like Spain, Portugal, and Greece, some of the poorest countries in Europe over the last couple hundred years. All right, so a couple hundred years can take us back into the Greek, back into Greek independence. So that's perfect. Some of the poorest countries. The thing is, poor by Christian Europe's standards is relative. Even now, like the Portuguese may be visibly more poor than the Germans or the English, but they are still among the most prosperous people in the world. And so it was 100 years ago. The place where, so what happens is you have the Soviet Union, you have China, and you have this, there is nothing, right? Everything is owned by the absolute elites. It is a true, thorough revolution. The poor people in Southern Europe did not want communism because they actually had stuff, and stuff they wanted to fight for. The intellectual classes and the more educated and sophisticated classes had to come in and interfere with Soviet support. And nowhere across Southern Europe did the communists and socialists win outright. In fact, nowhere in the West, west of former Tsarist Russia, did socialism triumph. The closest place that has come to happening in the West is in Latin America. And if you look in Latin America, socialism has taken root in what you could call indigenous America. So you have these legacies of the legacy of Christian societies creating poverty that is relative. People have land. They have some things that they've inherited and they want to fight for those things. So communism and socialism can't really take hold. It's just in the intellectual classes. Then you have highly prosperous Northern Europe. And of course there's not even a consideration of some sort of revolution. But this pernicious, filthy masses, hoi polloi idea is in there. It gets in there. The same people who travel to Spain to fight. And that's how, that over the last 100 years, that is how socialism has spread. Through the political class and through the cultural class, right? It's interesting, if you read the Wikipedia article on, in fact, I'll show this to you guys. I find this really fascinating. The Wikipedia article on Miguel de Unamuno. Who is actually, no, I need the English language. Wikipedia. Because, yeah, I was about to go to the Spanish article without thinking about it. And I remember that it's a problem in translation I'm going to show you guys. I think you guys will love this. Pardon me. All right. So here's a very famous poet, Spanish poet, absolutely gorgeous Christian, mystical, classical poetry. I love his stuff. All right. So let's find when he comes into conflict. All right. Yes. Okay. You guys will dig this. Yeah, okay, that does make it better, right? Yep. All right, so Miguel de Unamuno, so he supports the defense of Spanish culture, right? But he says things like, all right, so in 1936, Unamuno had a public argument with nationalist General Millán Astray at the university in which he denounced both Astray, with whom he had verbal battles in the 1920s, and elements of the nationalist faction. Shortly afterwards, Unamuno was removed for a second time as the rector of the University of Salamanca. A few days later, he confided to Nikos Kazantzakis, "No, I have not become a right-winger. Pay no mind to what people say. No, I have not betrayed the cause of liberty. But for now, it's totally essential that order be restored. One day I will rise up soon and throw myself into the fight for liberty by myself. No, I am neither fascist nor Bolshevik. I am alone." Okay, but it's important to note that the generation of 98, including him, they recognized Bolshevism as the threat first. But as things evolved, right? So Unamuno condemned the white herring committed by Franco's forces. Franco's army is waging a campaign against liberalism in the classical sense, not against Bolshevism. They will win, but they will not convince. They will conquer, but they will not convert. And then Unamuno is placed under house arrest by Franco. Okay, so here's the confrontation described in this Wikipedia article. So there are different versions of the story. Okay, so this happens in a public place during a lecture. Okay. So what he is said to have yelled, I want to show the best place to show this. All right, so this is how you know. Have you guys seen that that British sketch, Mitchell and Webb? They have a "Are We the Baddies" sketch, which is so funny. Right, it's SS troopers. They're wearing a skull on their caps. Okay, So the Spanish Legion had a motto, and their motto was "Long live death, viva la muerte." So people are chanting this to this general. So it's like someone in the auditorium shouts this out. In fact, I just need to read this to you guys. Sorry. According to the British historian Hugh Thomas in his magnum opus, The Spanish Civil War, 1961, the evening began with an impassioned speech by the Falangist writer José María Penman. After this, Professor Francisco Maldonado decried Catalonia and the Basque Country as cancers on the body of the nation, adding that fascism, the healer of Spain, will know how to exterminate them, cutting into the live flesh like a determined surgeon, free from false sentimentalism. So someone responds to that, moved, animated. From somewhere in the auditorium, someone cried out the Spanish Legion's motto, "Viva la muerte!" As was his habit, Millán Astray, the founder and first commander of the Spanish Legion, responded with "España!" The crowd replied with "Una!" He repeated, "España!" The crowd then replied, "Grande!" Okay, so right there's all this patriotic exaltation. And then later on, a group of uniformed phalangists enter and salute the portrait of Franco that hung on the wall. Okay, so this is clearly fascism versus Bolshevism. The fascists shout "Viva la muerte," which should make us think of the Mitchell and Webb sketch, "Are we the baddies?" Okay, now Unamuno was presiding over the meeting. He rose up slowly and addressed the crowd. "You are waiting for my words." And understand, he was a poet. He was rector, dean of a university. People read his newspaper articles. All the Generation of 98 guys. Okay, this is not like the irrelevance of American poets. "You are waiting for my words. You know me well and know I cannot remain silent for long. Sometimes to remain silent is to lie, since silence can be interpreted as assent. I want to comment on the so-called speech of Professor Maldonado, who is with us here. I will ignore the personal offense to the Basques and Catalans. I myself, as you know, was born in Bilbao. The bishop," and Unamuno gestures to the Archbishop of Salamanca, "whether you like it or not, is Catalan, born in Barcelona. But now I have heard this insensitive and necrophilous oath." I love that, because you know that's exactly what it said in Spanish. Necrophilous oath. "Viva la muerte. And I, having spent my life writing paradoxes that have provoked the ire of those who do not understand what I have written, and being an expert in this matter, find this ridiculous paradox repellent." Long live death, right? So that's the paradox. Live death. "General Millán Astray is a cripple. There is no need for us to say this with whispered tones. He is a war cripple. So was Cervantes." Oh, man. Read G.K. Chesterton's Lepanto, Battle of Lepanto. I made my Spanish literature class read that. It's a poem in English about Lepanto, and it mentions Cervantes. But unfortunately, Spain today has too many cripples, and if God does not help us soon, it will have very many more. It torments me to think that General Millán Astray could dictate the norms of the psychology of the masses. A cripple who lacks the spiritual greatness of Cervantes hopes to find relief by adding to the number of cripples around him. Millán Astray responded, "Death to intelligence, long live death." Okay. Millán Astray was a bad guy. Okay? The Phalangists were bad guys. Okay? I mean, it's like, who do you cheer for on the Eastern Front when the SS is fighting the Red Army? It's terribleness all over, right? And that's the kind of thing that happened in the Spanish Civil War. That's what it evolved into. Having said that, Millán Astray, a bad guy, did not say death to intelligence. Although I'm sure he said long live death. He said death to the intelligentsia. In fact, Penman, in an effort to calm the crowd, exclaimed, "No, long live intelligence, death to the bad intellectuals." So he had to draw a clear distinction. Okay. The thing is, the word for intelligence and what we call in English the intelligentsia is the same. And the fascists had realized that Bolshevicist thinking had taken over the academic classes already in the 1930s across most of Europe. Spain was actually one of the last holdouts to that. But that same class of intellectuals, quote unquote, right? There's some great books out there about intellectuals. That same class of intellectuals read something like that, and their interpretation, it's not they don't speak Spanish, but their interpretation of that makes it possible. Like, yeah, of course, Mianas, that I said death to intelligence. And I suppose, I was about to say, who on earth would say death to intelligence? But, you know, he does say, long live death, viva la muerte. So, okay, I'll give him that much. But like just that predisposition to think, yeah, you know what? All the people that the communist revolution is fighting hate intelligence. They're stupid monsters. That's baked into translating this like this. So dishonest. It's interesting. You may be interested to see what Unamuno's response is reputed to have been. Unamuno says, "This is the temple of intelligence, and I am its high priest. You are profaning its sacred domain. You will win because you have enough brute force, but you will not convince. In order to convince, it is necessary to persuade, and to persuade, you will need something that you lack, reason and right in the struggle. I see it as useless to ask you to think of Spain. I have spoken." And I think the great tragedy of Unamuno's life, I think, is that he ended up seeing a war between bad guys, and the bad guys won. Although the better bad guys. Anyway, so the whole reason I started off on that whole side thing was just this ridiculous idea that there are people out there who really believe that if you're not a socialist like them, a high-flying progressivist like them, that you're dumb and that you think that dumbness is great. What's the name of that movie? Oh, goodness. I never watched it because I found it disgusting even then 20 years ago. It's a movie about the future as being dumb because only dumb people had babies, right? I saw the opening of the movie and turned it off because I couldn't deal with it. But it was just this super smart, super precious, hypoallergenic white couple who couldn't have kids, and then they finally had a kid, and the kid died in an accident or something. But and then some redneck dumbass having 17 babies with 10 different women, and so society becomes dumb. What's the name of that movie? I forget. Anyway. That is the attitude that progressivists have toward us. And if there's some sort of objection to what academia or an intellectual class of high priests are doing, then we're just accused of being against intelligence itself. Outrageous. Oh, yes. Idiocracy was the name of that movie. Thank you. Google user number X. Idiocracy, man. All right. There's one other thing I wanted to. I don't even know what I have to say about this. Except I want to examine it, and I thought I'd examine it with you guys. But actually, you know what I'm going to do? Having talked about that white progressives article and then gone off on a Miguel de Unamuno tangent, I am going to go grab some more water to soothe my ailing throat. So enjoy some canned StreamYard music, and I'll see you guys in just a minute. appreciate that. That's how my live streams usually are. You're welcome to suggest tangents as well. But yeah, I just have this, oh goodness. Just 1 second. Oh. So I had a pretty rough cold over the weekend. Still recovering from that. So of course my solution is to, talk for an hour straight. Very natural, very natural. All right. Boom, boom. Okay, so Yuan Yizhu. Survey. I don't know all the details of this thing. On people who think euthanasia is fine. And what good reasons for granting euthanasia. We'll use a nice, positive, friendly verb. How's the music, by the way, guys? Is that a nice volume? Or would you rather just not have music at all? Yeah, so the listed reasons for granting euthanasia: poverty, homelessness, the very neutrally stated in their social medicine nation, inability to receive medical treatment, mental illness, and disability. It's interesting. All right, so those are the legitimate reasons for seeking euthanasia and for the government granting euthanasia. It's broken down by gender and age. I think I just want to look across Canada. Although, I mean, man, it's interesting to see the drop-offs on reasons. So if you look across, like, say, poverty, the first two categories are agree that it's a good reason. The next two are disagree, either moderately or strongly, and then a not sure. Yeah. Okay, so plenty of people non-committal on the issue of state euthanasia, state-regulated euthanasia. But one of the things that's interesting is the numbers of the 55 plus. Anyway, all right. So poverty. 27% of Canadians agree. So a quarter of Canadians think that poverty is a good reason for euthanasia. It's fully a quarter. And what is poverty? I mean, we've kind of been talking about that on and off the whole stream. Because there's a lot of misery in life, no denying it. And I'm sure there are miserable Canadians with legitimate reasons for being miserable. But the poverty is relative. And the misery of humans in Canada, like 99.999% of them, of miserable Canadians, are not going to be miserable because of the misery of their poverty. Canadians are like Mexicans and Americans. The poorer they are, the fatter they are. Poverty is usually a symptom of misery elsewhere. So to imagine, like, basically these are Canadians who are not poor by any measure, even of the Canadian government, deciding for other people, right, that poverty is a good enough reason. My life sucks enough already as it is, right? What if I lived in a trailer on some terrible Indian reservation and my brother smoked meth? Well, see, that we're getting outside of poverty. right? It's like it's other stuff. It's ultimately the spiritual emptiness. Canada. Aren't you glad I didn't say, oh, Canada? Canada. People should become missionaries to Canada. I'm telling y'all. South Korea and South Africa and Brazil and Colombia, they're all sending missionaries to the places they consider the most godless. You know what those places are? I mean, I know plenty of Brazilian missionaries who went to the Amazon or to China. They go to places like England, Canada, Sweden, because they are so godless. 30-day reviews. What is up, my dude? I appreciate you stopping by to say hi. We are doing quite well. Thank you. Hope you and yours are well as well. Nice of you to drop in. And if I can recommend to you guys, he does some fun stuff on this channel. 30-day reviews. So feel free to drop by, y'all. In fact, I'm going to very briefly, because I appreciate dropping in. This is such an intimate stream. I will put a link to 30-day reviews in the chat. There we go. This is the Twitch version of a Twitch shout out. This is my YouTube version of that. Boo doo doo boo doo doo. All right. So 20% of Canadians agree, moderately or strongly, that poverty is a good reason, a good justification for euthanasia. Homelessness, 28%. Inability to receive medical treatment, 51%. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. So the majority of Canadians. And man, look at those numbers across the ages. Even old people. 47% of those 55 and older think that the inability to receive medical treatment is a good reason. That usually is where the argument for euthanasia hangs its hat, right? Mental illness. So there we're talking about 43%, is that right? Yeah, 43%. And disability, 50%. Disability and inability to receive medical treatment, you can easily conflate into like some sort of irresolvable medical issue. Man, the horror. I saw a thumbnail on YouTube the other day that I confess I lacked the courage to click. I think I approve. But man, I just don't think I could bear it. What is it? Well, somehow it came up in my YouTube feed. I'd be curious enough if you guys have watched any of this at all, but I think some comedian giving a comedy show and talking about abortion and saying to the English audience, you guys have killed more babies than Stalin did, or it was some sort of Stalin or Hitler comparison. But his face was hilarious and it was clearly a comedy show. And there's some sense in which it was Chappelle had had some moments like that in some of his recent stuff, but the vibe I got from the thumbnail and the video title was that this was a Christian comedian kind of doing this on purpose, doing comedy about abortion. And I'm ambivalent, but slightly positive toward that idea, right? Like putting on a bit of a laugh show, but forcing people to like using the actual words, right? Like, you've killed babies, ha ha ha, but take home the idea that you've killed babies. But I certainly didn't want to watch it myself, and I almost clicked once because it showed up in my feed several times, just to study the art and science of it. But I'd be very curious to know if any of you guys came across anything like that. But the reason that came into my mind just now is just the idea of confronting such a jaded society, so jaded in the culture of death, right? To the point now where we are, the generation of adults that's coming up next is very comfortable with talking about killing babies. That is what abortion is. It's killing babies, and that's the thing. I'm fine with it, right? I need to advance my own life, and I need to live for myself. And yes, it's killing a baby, but the baby doesn't have any right to life yet, right? For whatever, and then whatever convoluted logics they use. It's like that degree of jadedness takes some pretty remarkable things to break through. But I don't think that's where the main battle is. The main battle is in building up our families and building up our churches. And that's how the culture will be transformed. But I certainly think that's a good and noble fight. But comedy. How about some comedy about euthanasia and abortion that leaves it clear that they are evil? That's a pretty interesting notion. Why don't we close with this from John B. Ostensibly by David French. Good times. God, I thank you that I am not like other white evangelicals. An op-ed by David French, New York Times columnist and Gulag Hall monitor. Good stuff. Let's see if we can get some bigger print here. Thank you, David French. So much more just than all the other white evangelicals. Jeffrey Ward did. We proclaim in the pages of the stupid. Thank you, Lord. Not like these evil Christians who declined the COVID vaccine. Stuff might have been. You know what? That always happens. If there was a baby literally about to be murdered and I had to vote for Donald Trump to save the baby's life, how thankful I am to be righteous enough to refrain from voting for that man. I mean, it's all true, but it's funny because it's true. It's for Homer Simpson. So slightly disappointing. Is the Babylon Bee headlines are where it's at, and of course their videos. Oh, never mind. I'm not going to read that whole thing to you guys. What a gift it is to be me. All right. That, by the way, was the voice of David French, not me. Whose song is this? This is actually just canned music from StreamYard. So I have acoustic cinematic. And there's dance pop, daydreaming, feeding the ducks, but I can add music as well. I was just using the generic canned music. Alas. All right. Well, that white progressive story was a big one I wanted to get into, and then we got to have a fun Miguel de Unamuno excursion. I should do a poetry stream sometime soon and read you guys some of Unamuno's poetry in translation. In fact, I am going to close with something from Unamuno. Let me see if I have in any of my personal files any Unamuno in English. I have a couple collections of some of his contemporaries in my bookshelves, but not his. Yeah, you know what? Joffrey's ASMR. Yeah, that's right. Hold on. Yeah, that's right. Joffrey's ASMR. I mean, I've been told from the days of being a radio guest at Christian radio stations to manning drive-thrus at Starbucks that I have a good voice. So, if it lulls thee to sleep, then sleep well, sweet child. All right, I am going to read some poems to you guys now in order for us to end. And actually, my new Twitter profile, in which I call myself Joffrey Swait. I think I'm going to start going by my name. Yoshi, like that one. I'm going to start going by my name more and more regularly. I mean, this is still the... I was like, ah! Yeah. Yeah, it should have. I have to go back and see how that sounded. Because that's actually sort of an area mic. I don't like having a mic near me, so I have an area mic, which makes people take you less seriously. Anyway, I can only imagine what putting my mouth next to that thing did. Anyway, there's my new Twitter account. So I'm back on Twitter, Joffrey Swait. The lines for my profile are actually from one of these poems, part of a big series, and I see the Trinity present in these three poems. So I hope you guys will enjoy. You are going to have to put up with the fact that I am going to be translating it for you live. So it won't be beautifully rhythmic or anything. So 419 is entitled The Nails, the Art. Oh, I think this is probably a better, well, how about that? The Nails, the Art. The art emerged with which your hands you sanctified. Master carpenter. Callous they are in your youthfulness. Of a dark knot you handling the nails when you sweat over the wood of this your cross. Wedding bed. Augury, omen. Daily winning for yourself the measly bits of the bread that you teach us to earn each day, asking it of your Father. 420 is called fire. Fire you have come to cast upon the earth. fire you yourself are. White light that rains tongues of fires upon your apostles came down, you in your glory, and were tongues of the word, made man in the vessels of the heavens, from the luminous body that lives off of fish, son of water, from mute fish of the cold abyss, that beneath the branches puts its nest. Fire you are, and to the heavens, to the sky, go up, always searching out the sun, your Father, eternal home, and you fly to your Father with your arms, wings of fire, rending the shadows, rending the darkness. Torment, or storm, because it's the same word in Spanish, which is cool. So the word for torment is just the normal way you say storm, as if the sky were tormented, which it is. Torment, or storm. When we die of thirst, give us Christ, a flood, a windstorm of black waters that drill into the marrow of the soul. That is actually the line I have in my profile there. I'm going to read the last little bit again. When we die of thirst, give us Christ, a windstorm of black waters that drills into us the marrow of the soul. Waterfalls that strike us in the face, that whip us in the face. But may the heart not die of thirst, even as the storm devastates it. Such is your thirst, longing of finding oneself naked and living rock, face to face to the sun naked. And by the water, pain, pity, that from the mantle of the earth is plundered. And your paths are on the many waters, Father of Christ. The sea is your path. Now that is an appropriate way to end a stream. Okay, y'all, thanks for popping in. Thanks to Yoshi, 30 Days, Izzy, Huskarl, everyone else. Appreciate you guys. And, isn't that great? The sea is your path. Yeah, so your paths are upon the many waters. The sea is your path. So one of the reasons I see a lot of Trinity in that is the presence of these elements, and fire representing the Holy Spirit. You know, he made that very clear in 420. It starts with that Jesus, Master Carpenter thing. But then the water, water is such an interesting element to think of in a Trinitarian fashion. Nelson, a pleasure to have you here as well. I'm really glad. I'm glad you're around. I appreciate your earlier comments as well. I will see you guys online, hither, thither, or yon. Thanks so much. Peace of Christ be upon you all.